This is the second part in a 3-part series on reading and writing strategies for the secondary social studies classroom. And today we're going to look at during reading strategies. In our previous video, we looked at pre-reading, but today we're going to focus on during reading. And then our next and last in our series will be post-reading. So in this particular section on the during reading strategies, the text really emphasized the need for engaged, active readers. Students and even perhaps us as adults often fall into some bad habits as we are reading. We often do not try to have our mind engaged, and we fall into the bad habit of just reading words for words' sake. But we as teachers know that that is a bad habit to have. If we're going to read, we need to have a purpose, a why behind the reading task. And so, and even as adults, when we have a why for what we're doing, whether it be, a simple chore around the home, or it be a reading task, or it be something that our administration has asked us to do, when we have a why behind that task, we are more likely to be engaged, and our students are the same way. And so these particular strategies are helpful in giving our students that purpose. And we talked a little bit about purpose and the importance of it in the first video. But when we have that purpose, they are more likely to be motivated, more likely to be engaged. And so our strategies that we're going to be looking at today, there are 3, really try to help students find that motivation and to find that purpose. So our first strategy is to help students find evidence to support claims. So you're going to give students claim statements before reading, and they're going to look at those claim statements, they're going to read them, and then they're going to search for evidence that either support or refute those claims while reading. So of course the goal is to give them a clear purpose, like I mentioned, as they are reading, and then they're going to be looking for specific evidence. This can be connected, these claims can be connected to themes within your class as you're interacting with the text. Ultimately, they should be connected to big ideas of a unit or a text, and not necessarily something that a text is trying to prove or disprove. But instead, these should be very directly contradictory or oppositional claims. And so that students can be looking at these statements to determine that they are, yes, indeed factual or not factual, and something that they can take a side on before they read, and then as they are reading, and then of course after. And then students frequently often find it very helpful as a reflection to after they have read and after they have found their evidence for these claims, to have a discussion with the classmate or with the group on why they chose the answers that they chose, and then the evidence they found to support those claims. So for example, perhaps your students are reading a text on the Salem witch trials. You may have students that you may have 3 thematic statements. The first could be Tituba and her followers were charged with witchcraft due to their strange behavior. Is this claim accurate? Yes, it is. And then from the text, they would give specific evidence to support this particular claim. Then they might move on to the second thematic claim, the Puritans and information from a person's past was used to charge them with witchcraft, which is not accurate. This is not a true claim. So then they could use evidence to refute that claim from the text. And then a third thematic claim could be the cause of the witch scare in Salem was never identified, which is true. They never did truly identify exactly what caused this claim, though there have been a lot of theories about that. So what might be helpful, especially as you're first starting out with this particular strategy, is to have maybe a half sheet of paper with the themes in one column printed out, and then have a column for is the claim accurate, where they would just simply write yes or no, and then have a third column for evidence, where they write out specific evidence and page numbers for the text. This particular book particularly recommends that you only have 3 to 5 statements to provide students to think through as they are reading, and ultimately you should be connecting these claims to the big ideas of the text. Our next strategy is the primary source graphic organizer, and honestly, this is probably my favorite one, as primary sources are particularly difficult, I think, for students in history, specifically because, especially depending on what era of history you're studying, some of the language might be particularly difficult for students to understand. So this graphic organizer, I think, really helps focus students on what's important and helping them glean that from the text. But then also, I think this graphic organizer really helps students to go beyond just answering like 5 questions after they have, about the text that they read, but it goes beyond that into some deeper thinking and application. So let's look at this graphic organizer, and obviously, like, these questions could be changed or adapted depending on the text that you're reading. I also really liked the fact that this particular one isn't just for during reading. There's a pre-reading, during reading, and after reading, so that students are thinking the whole way through the reading process. So it goes into just the bare bones of the pre-reading for the type of document, the author of the document, when it was written, and then the source. So it even goes into like the town, the country of where it was created, when was it originally published, is there any prior knowledge that this student has about this particular document. And then during reading, looking at the style, and remember I mentioned the language, that does allow for what is unusual about the language used in the document. It also, their point of view of the document. You could even look at vocabulary, as far as are there any vocabulary words that they have already learned about that could be mentioned, or written or recorded here. And then for post reading, it helps them to think about the main idea of the document. What is the main point? Summarize the document. Are there any questions that they have about the document? Why is the document important? And then any further research they want to do. So ultimately, this particular strategy is very, very helpful for helping students think through this. Now, it is highly recommended that teachers model for students how to use this graphic organizer. And ultimately, you would probably want to do it in sections as you move through the text, and to adapt it ultimately to your students, the reading that you're looking at, and then of course the specific course that you're teaching. So it is recommended that you use a very short primary source when starting out, so you can model the different steps as you are reading, and then going back and forth between the graphic organizer. And then after modeling, it gives students an opportunity to work with the graphic organizer, perhaps allowing them to work in groups, so they can learn from each other, as they are hopefully learning to evaluate a primary source. And then finally, for our final strategy, text chunking is a really valuable strategy, as it allows you as the teacher and as the student to individualize their learning. Text chunking is very simple. It just allows students to break the text into manageable parts. So this could, and then it gives them a chance to take a thinking break or compartmentalize what they've read. And even as you were doing text chunking, especially if you have like a distracted student, you might give them like a little tiny task to do every time they take a break. But ultimately, this allows the student to identify that they are either struggling with the text or they're doing really well with the text, but break it into pieces that's manageable for them. Some students can read obviously several pages before they need to take that break. Other students may only be able to read a paragraph, but this is where individualizing that is so important, and it helps you as a teacher to be able to do that, and it helps students to recognize their own skill level and their own educational needs. And then obviously there's the other aspect of sometimes we as teachers find a text that is difficult for students to read and to analyze and to understand, especially if the vocabulary is very difficult. And so by teaching them to use this strategy, regardless of the level, if you as the teacher decide that it is an important text for them to read, it allows you to teach them a strategy that can help them still learn and use that text but not be overwhelmed by it. So that is the end of our during reading strategies for today. Our next section will be over post reading, and that'll be our final video in this series.